Good day everyone, this is Roger and welcome to this new episode of BIA, the Dodgers of Canada. During our last episode, we relived some crucial moments of the Battle of the Gully to capture objective Cider. And once Cider was captured, the Canadian Division had suffered heavy losses. But now the door is open for 2 brigades to enter Ortona, and the intelligence reports suggested that the Germans were likely to move to the next defendable feature, which was north to the Ariali River. However, the German paratroopers will prove them wrong. Those paratroopers that are defending Ortona have received the order to defend it to the last man, and they will fight like desperate lions from street to street and house to house. We are very fortunate today to have with us our good friends of the Gustav Line reenactment to help us relive some of the street fighting, and expert historian Madame Angela Arnone, who will guide us through the key point of interest of the city. So, let's go together and discover the Battle of Ortona. On December 20th, before the Canadians entered the city of Ortona, the Germans had already started to blow some buildings to create piles of rubble, to channel the Canadians into kill zones that would be covered by machine gun, mortar, anti-tank guns, mines, and booby traps. Even the harbor had been wrecked by sunken vessels who would block the entry. The only way toward the city center was Corso Vittorio Emanuele, that led to what is known today as Canada Hero Park, back then Piazza Municipale, and this place was turned into a perfect killing zone. On Monday the 20th, when they started their advance at noon, the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, reduced in numbers by previous battles, was reorganized into 3 half-strength companies of 60 men each, supported by tanks of the Three Rivers Regiment, machine guns and mortars of the Saskatchewan Light Infantry, along with anti-tank guns of the 90th Anti-Tank Battery. They advanced toward the town, following behind a heavy artillery barrage until they reached the outskirts of the town. Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson decided to stop and dig in for the night to avoid street fighting in the dark. In the meantime, Charlie and Delta Company of the Seaforth Highlanders were moving north on a road near the coast from the gully toward the church Santa Maria di Costantinopoli, when they encountered the German paratroopers, who fought savagely to stop them. But the Seaforth had the upper hand and made it to the church. By the end of December 20th, the gully that had been the scene of so much bloodshed was now behind the advancing Canadians and had regained its status of only another feature. On the morning of December 21st, a day celebrated by the people of Ortona as the Feast of St. Thomas, the advancing Canadians were awakened by a series of explosions from demolitions being set off by the paratroopers. The most terrific explosion came from the north end of the city, when, in an attempt to bring down the high watchtower, the southern half of the cathedral completely collapsed in a tremendous roar that was felt through the whole city. The Loyal Eddies continued to advance toward Piazza Vittoria along Corso Emanuele, located approximately 300 meters from Piazza Municipale, through bloody house-to-house fighting, as the German paratroopers were conducting perfect delaying and killing tactics. On December 22nd, Major Jim Stone of Delta Company Loyal Edmonton Regiment proposed a daring plan to break through the German paratroopers' defense in an attempt to isolate their rear. He believed that their defensive line was pretty thin, and his plan almost worked. His company started to advance along Corso Vittorio Emanuele behind the tanks of the Three Rivers Regiment, sirens blowing and guns flaring until they reached a big pile of rubble that was about 8 meters high and just 25 meters short of Piazza Municipale. We'll never know if it's because the loss of momentum or because the Germans allowed them to get this close, but it didn't take time for all hell to break loose. However, the determined Major Stone and his brave loyal ladies fought courageously and by nightfall had cleared the piazza. Major Stone, being infuriated by the stall of the advance, charged single-handedly a German anti-tank gun and threw a grenade at the crew, using the anti-tank gun shield as protection. For his exemplary leadership and courage, Major Stone was awarded the Military Cross. Now, the loyal ladies being exposed on their left flank, it was clear that to be able to pursue any further, the Seafort Highlanders would have to cover that exposed flank by advancing through the adjacent streets. A day-by-day account of the battle would be very difficult. The organizing Canadian advance through the streets was measured at times by doorway to doorway, courtyard to courtyard, and rooftop to rooftop. The Canadians understood very quickly that in urban fighting, tight control and coordination was vital, and the Ortona was divided and subdivided in battalion, company, and platoon objectives that sometimes consisted of only 2 or 3 houses. It could be suicidal to send men in the streets, so movement from house to house was done by conducting a new technique called mouse holing, which consisted by blowing a wall on the upper floor and clearing the house room by room from top to bottom. At the end of Ortona, the Canadians were acknowledged as masters of house-to-house fighting by American historian Robert Wallace. On the morning of December 28, a patrol sent out by Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson to the Castello on the northern edge of the city reported that there was no signs of the Germans. The unbowed German paratroopers had left Ortona. Unfortunately, the poor citizens of Ortona came back from their hiding places in the mountains to find their homes and their city completely destroyed. During the following weeks, many will die from mines and booby traps left by the Germans. One can only imagine their despair and praise their resilience and courage to clean up and rebuild their city.
Called it Little Stalingrad. By shortwave radio, his reports came from the heart of the battle. The ruin of Ortona had not been caused by shell or bomb. This town, they said, had been blown down by hand. The Canadians had faced the best the Germans had, and they had beaten these Germans. But in the month of December 1943,
in the aftermath of every battle comes the poignant task of caring for those men who lost their lives. Following the bitter hand-to-hand fighting at Ortona, the Sea Force of Canada put to rest their war-weary comrades. Gathered at the graveside with the chaplain, the men stand in silent tribute with the words of the lesson read by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton, echoing across the battle-scarred resting place. As the strains of the last post fade across the Adriatic, the Sea Force seal the graves of their comrades with flowers of the forest. This bit of earth in foreign soil, this resting place from strife and toil, from blood and sweat and tears, refuge, well loved, remembered always.
The month of December has been the bloodiest month that the Canadians had during the start of the Italian campaign. Just for the Battle of Ortona alone, the Loyal Ladies lost 172 men killed and wounded. The Seaforth Highlanders, 103 men killed and wounded. For the whole month of December, the Canadian troops, or the Canadian units, have lost 695 dead, 1,738 wounded, and 1,773 soldiers sick, for a total of 4,206. This is a large price to pay for victory. Once Ortona fell on the 28th of December, there were other battles to be waged north and west of Ortona. For example, San Nicola and San Tommaso were big objectives or big battles for the 1st Brigade. And the hills west and north of those towns, also in Ortona, had other bloody battles for the elements of the 3rd Brigade. It was not until January rolled in that the Canadians had to stop their advance and get into a winter mode operations to allow them enough time to reconstitute the units and rebuild their numbers. They were loved, and many cried because they never came back home. And we must not only remember them, but more than that. Good morning, Angela. Nice meeting you.
Great.
So we're finally here in Ortona to cover the story of our documentary about the portion of the Canadians we're here.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy to have you because I heard a lot of good things, only good things about
That's
Angela.
nice to know.
Why are you doing what you're doing?
Okay, well, technically, officially, I am the agent for the Three Rivers Tank Regiment Ortona veterans in what you see in this square, which is called Piazza degli Eroi Canadesi. That's Canadian Hero Square. And it contains a monument called the Price of Peace Monument. And that was the start of the official memory project as far as Ortona and the Canadian veterans is concerned. But I was also a founder of the Battle of Ortona Museum, and I have been instrumental in not just this monument here, the Price of Peace, but also in the Cider Crossroads monument, which consists of a Sherman tank called Athena. And I think what I'd like to talk about mainly with you is the interaction that there was between the Canadians and the people of Ortona, like the human side.
Yes.
Because the Canadian veterans had a very strong connection with the town of Ortona. They helped rebuild it after the battle, and they stayed here for several months. A relationship with the people of the town helped them get their lives back on track. I think Ortona has never forgotten. It really has a debt of gratitude to the Canadians. It's interesting to notice in this square, which has just recently been refurbished, and also with a donation from Veterans Affairs, who paid for this fountain. So Google Maps, when you type in Canadian Heroes Square, will show you a maple leaf, a stylized maple leaf. So the architect who designed the square dedicated it to the Canadian sacrifice in this way. And then there's more information about the actual monument itself to do.
Should we go look at it? Like, I'd like to see the stealth here, what it reads.
This is, it's the Price of Peace monument, and what you see, if you get up close, are two Canadian soldiers, two brothers in arms. And they're actually inspired by the Loyal Edmonton Regiment. I wanted to tell you about these two ladies, Francesca and Maria La Sorda. During the battle, they were 18 to 20 years old.
All right.
They came from a very, very poor family because their father had been killed in an accident at work. So they took refuge through Christmas in this barn. They had no food, they had no water. Nobody was sharing anything. The people who did have food, they ate it themselves. There was no, oh, you have a piece of my bread. No.
Survival.
Nope. So then, after the 28th of December, word came through that the Germans had gone. And they set off, and it's winter, and it's muddy, and it's cold. They take a shortcut across the field because it's the easiest, quickest way to get to Ortona. And suddenly they hear screaming and shouting. And this guy is jumping up and down and stop, stop. They stop in their tracks, and he walks very gingerly across this field, one step at a time, looking where he's going. And he gets there and he explains in whatever language he can use, because they obviously don't speak any English.
He doesn't speak Italian.
He doesn't speak Italian, and he's just.
So he's probably talking with his hands.
Yeah, it's dangerous, dangerous.
Yeah.
So he picks up Maria, who's the smaller of the two, and he literally carries her across the field. Puts her down, goes back, picks up Francesca, carries her across the field, and then he says, "Now you can go." And what they realize is that this young Canadian, because then they see the red patch.
Right.
This young Canadian has walked across a German minefield and he's saved their lives. But when we placed this monument, after a few days, we started to find that in the crook of the knee, there were always just here fresh flowers.
Okay.
And because people knew that I was the agent for the Three Rivers Regiment, they thought it was me. And I said, well, no, I bring flowers on special occasions, but not every day. And Ortona is a very small town, so it doesn't take long to find out what's going on. And a friend of mine sort of, he hung around the corner because he was really curious to know who was doing this. And he saw these two tiny little ladies going into the market just behind us where they sell fresh flowers.
All right.
Buying, checking the flowers. If they were still fresh, they wouldn't replace them. But as soon as they wilted or dried out or spoiled, a new bouquet would be placed. And he followed them and he saw them go back to the house over there. So he went and knocked on the door and he asked, why do you do this?
Where's the door?
It's just over here. They live right next to the monument.
Is that right? Well, let's go. If you can show us, that would be fantastic.
Yes, it's just over here. And they were actually thrilled that they were able to commemorate their Canadian heroes right on their doorstep.
Wow. So that's where they lived.
They lived in here, and it's actually a dark, damp apartment that is not intended for human habitation. And they ended up moving in here at the beginning of 1944, and they lived here until they died because they didn't have enough money to go anywhere else. got to the square, which is Piazza San Francesco, he trained his guns on the church because they knew there were Germans. Thank was there. That's the church. Okay.
Okay.
Rebuilt now, so
Rebuilt, yeah.
the buildings that came right up here that were destroyed. People left, there were houses here.
Yes.
And that building next to the church is the hospital.
Over there?
Yeah, that bit there. But the Three Rivers tanks stopped here. They took the front off the church, and then the guns started to train over to the other side because they knew that the Germans had occupied the first floor there. What they didn't know was that there were 500 civilians of all ages on the ground floor. They were sleeping in the bathrooms, they were sleeping in the wards where there would have been sick people. The Germans actually nailed the doors shut so they couldn't get out. So they were hostages.
Yeah.
The Canadians were not aware of this. They just knew there was German presence in there. And this is the first school. And there were Germans in there as well. So you really
Crossfire. They were covering all the angles.
Very difficult situation here.
So they had incoming fire from both angles then.
So the guns start to, obviously the turrets starts to swing around because we've taken this out, we've got to finish the job. And out of a side street, there are more of these little back alleys here. A young woman runs out and risks her life, and she's jumping up and down in front of the tank saying, "Stop!" So one of the commanders comes out of the side street and he grabs her and he says, "What are you doing?" And she explains in French, "Il y a beaucoup de civils."
Okay.
And so he stops the tanks. That lady, whose name was Maria, and she was a school teacher, she didn't speak any English, but she spoke French, and she knew that the Canadians would understand. She saved the lives of 500 people. The tanks have been going and the machine guns have been going. He comes out, and the description I have from the outside is this bedraggled line of humanity that is dirty, starving, thirsty. They didn't even have water in there. Nuns, priests, sick people, children, old people, and they all just file out of here. They realize that the Germans have been immobilized, and they just disappear. And this square is known to Canadians as Dead Horse Square because where this coffee bar is was the home of a man called Ciampoli, right?
Okay.
Ciampoli was the equivalent of a taxi driver. Now, he didn't have a car, but he had a horse. So that horse was Ciampoli's best friend. When the horse was spooked by all the shooting, he broke the door down. He rushed out into the square and he was killed immediately. And Ciampoli rushed after to save his horse, and he was killed, and he fell on top of the horse. Later, when the Canadians were coordinating, and this is one of the things you'll find in war dives, there's so many churches in Ortona that if you say, "Oh, there's a church," it's of no use whatsoever.
Okay, yeah.
They said, "But there's a dead horse in the square." All right, Dead Horse Square.
Okay, so it became the mark. Wow, what a great, incredible story. Luciano's gonna fall in love. There's cats.
Well, we did something sort of a bit similar to this.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
But that's the video I'm talking about.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's here.
It's here.
It's here.
Okay, well, that's what. Because we have the video of that tank shooting.
This building became important to us a couple of years ago because I was contacted by a lady called Nancy, who's from New Brunswick.
Okay.
And she said her father had fought in the Battle of Ortona, and he'd been here at Christmas 1943. And the only thing he ever told them was when on Canadian TV you would get reports about the Christmas dinner, and it would show the C4 pilots and so on, he would say, "I wasn't at that Christmas dinner."
And where was he?
Where were you, Dad? And he couldn't quite place it. So he had been he was Royal Canadian Artillery, and he was forward
Observation forward observation officer.
He said that from where he was looking onto the town of Ortona, and all of the Germans and the Canadians, he could see them all milling around. They couldn't see each other, but from where he was, he could see these people. And we figured out he must have been on the top of this.
On this building?
Yeah. She found photographs similar to this.
Okay.
But it was actually, they were stills from a video that was taken.
Okay, yeah.
During the video, you see a man with his back to the wall, like doing this.
And
it was him.
That was him.
We have no doubt it was him.
Could you tell me, or could you bring me where it actually happened, the Christmas dinner?
It's a 5-minute walk from here. If we just go down here, that's the quickest way.
Well, let's go.
Let's go.
So, tell me, Angela, this is the church where that Christmas dinner happened.
Yeah, it's the legendary Christmas church, Christmas dinner church. After the Sea Force had liberated this church from the Germans who had hold in here, and they came up the hillside that's behind this church, you will see photographs. There's one where they're actually in the church, and the tradition is that the officers serve the men.
Yep.
And that's what happened.
It's still today.
And I think there's 1 or 2 photographs of that. Not all the sea folks got here. Now our friend Smokey said, I'm not going to risk my bacon for a piece of road.
Right, Smokey didn't get it, but he made it to the end of the war.
He did, yeah.
He did.
What you can't see now, because they've built over it, is the side wall that is in the famous courtyard photograph.
Okay, so maybe we should go have a look at the courtyard photograph.
From this photograph, you can get a much better idea of what I'm trying to explain.
Okay.
You can see in this small frame here, there's a Sherman tank, and there's a porch, and there's another porch here.
All right, see that, yeah. That is not there because there's a wall now.
All destroyed as the battle waged. This photograph is under that porch.
Okay.
So you can see the medieval wall it's the side wall of this church.
Of that church.
And you can see they've got their fruit, their bottles of beer. They don't have the linen tablecloths because there weren't enough to go around, but they've got cutlery. They've got their cigarettes. And sadly, as I say, for many of these men, the last music they heard was Wilt Gildersleeve's organ or Edmund Essence pipes.
Right.
And this was their last meal, and they went back.
Yeah, for a lot of them, it might have been their last meal.
When you go to the cemetery, you will see 25th of December, 1943 is the date of death.
Romeo Hébert of Saint-Simon, New Brunswick, and Edmond Chiasson of Pigeon Hill, New Brunswick, were 2 friends serving in the Carlton and York Regiment the day of Christmas 1943, somewhere north of San Leonardo. As Romeo and Edmond were leaving the Mass after receiving the sacrament on their way to the Christmas dinner, a German mortar bomb fell close to the men, and the shrapnel mortally wounded Romeo, who still had the hostia in his mouth. It was impossible for Edmond to save his friend's life. And Edmond will relate that story every Christmas day to his family. Romeo never had the chance to make it to the Christmas dinner or to realize his dream to be a mechanic.
The rest was short. The return to the murderous streets immediate.
Was developed.
Mouse holding from the top floor.
Exactly. The Germans were on the higher floors. They had set their snipers up on the top floors. They'd booby-trapped a lot of the buildings so that when the Canadians arrived and maybe tried to open a door, the building would explode on top of them.
Yes.
There was all the rubble in the street. The tanks were like, where do I go from here? And the Edmontons who'd been out in the open, they were cold, they were tired, they were fed up, they took refuge in this building. That was the 27th of December.
Okay.
Again, that building was booby-trapped, and the Germans were in the facing building. The name of the German who had booby-trapped the building was Karl Bayerlein. When the Canadians went into this building, they weren't aware of the German presence. And Bayerlein told us that his commanding officer said, detonate. It was 28 men. I mean, he didn't count, but knew it was a big group of men. He killed everybody but one. Yeah, he killed everybody but one. And the name of the survivor was Roy Boyd.
That's the one, we see the picture, he's being dug out.
3 days to dig him out.
Well, thank you very much, Angela, for everything you showed us today. You know, coming here will shed a lot of light on what the Canadians did during the Italian campaign, and even more here in Ortona, which has very special. It's a very special battle in the whole history of the Italian campaign, and what probably the most, where we lost the most men. You know, and it's important for every generation of Canadians to remember that. This is the reason we're doing the BIA-DD Dodgers of Canada, and this is the reason why we're doing this. And really, I thank you for watching and for your interest in wanting to learn our history, to be guardians of the memory, so we never forget the sacrifices that were made by everyone during this terrible war, that we can remember what happened so we don't repeat the same mistakes again. Angela, thank you for being a guardian of the memory.
My pleasure.
You really are an angel.
Thank you.
All right, so for Bravery in Arms, this is Roger. Please keep watching us, keep following what we do as we continue our journey in the Italian campaigns. For BIA-DD Dodgers of Canada, this is Roger. Till we meet again, Custos Memoria.